Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode by What the Feminism podcast. Joining us today is Sarah Ryan, Director of DePauw's Women's Center and a leading advocate for survivors of sexual assault. She has spent decades shaping civic education and service learning initiatives. Since 2011, she's been a driving force at DePauw, coordinating the Sexual Assault Survivor Advocate Program and leading vital conversations on women's issues through advocacy, education, and community engagement. Thank you so much for your time today. Could you start by telling us a bit more about the Women's Center and its influence and significance on the campus?
Sure. So the Women's Center celebrated its 20th anniversary this past fall semester. And the origin story is that in 2002, then University President Bob Bottoms appointed a task force to study the status of women on campus. So a group interviewed and spoke with students, faculty, and staff and gathered a lot of information about their experiences and their needs. And one of the recommendations that the task force put out was to form a women's center. So it took a couple of years to get the building and the programs and the staffing in place. But in September of 2004, the Women's Center at DePauw opened. Since then, the Women's Center has been offering a variety of programs, services, and advocacy for students primarily. But we have actually become more employee-facing too, now that we are situated in the Division of Institutional Equity under the direction of Dr. Dion Jackson.
Yeah.
So we are also providing support and resources to staff and faculty too. So the programs can look like speakers and films and discussions, meals, workshops, those kinds of things. The services include the space which students can utilize. We also have free, high-quality, safer sex products, period products, other personal care items, and we make a lot of referrals and do consultations with students and employees. And then the advocacy includes a 24/7 hotline for students to call, a safe room in the building if students need to get out of their living environment. As well as a team of advocates. We call them SASAs. It stands for Sexual Assault Survivor Advocates. We have a team of staff who can support students as they navigate potentially being harmed by someone on campus.
What you say is so true because I remember I first visited the DePauw Women's Center I think in late September. That was a bit too late now that I think of it, but in late September. And it seemed like a really welcoming and cozy place at first, and I remember going to the washroom, and the washroom is like filled with like marker notes and quotations and little doodles written by students, and it was so warm and welcoming and nice there. I think it's a really comfortable and it's a really important safe space for students on campus. Why do you think it's important to have dedicated spaces like this on college campuses?
Yeah. One, I love that was your experience. And coming to visit the Women's Center in September of your first year of college is not too late. We have students who are seniors and they've never walked in the Women's Center. So that's a perennial challenge for us, just to elevate awareness of the Women's Center, that it exists and what it does. I think the importance for me is to have a safe and welcoming space that affirms people no matter why they're coming in and no matter who they are, so that people don't have to check a part of themselves when they come into the space, and that they find a place to connect with resources, to have support as maybe they're working through a challenging situation, as well as have people to celebrate with if they're doing something really great and they've accomplished something that deserves acknowledgement and recognition. Finding a place for belonging on a college campus is so important.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when we think about belonging, we're like, oh, that sounds like a really nice thing, but it's actually essential to human beings. So if the Women's Center can be a place where students can find other students who are interested in issues that affect women, or can get connected to resources, Or, students play a huge part in leadership in the Women's Center too. So we have a whole intern team, a resident intern who lives in the building, and then other students who help staff the building and hear from their peers what kinds of topics they would like events to be addressed. The Women's Center is also a place for students to develop their leadership, their organizing skills, their presentation skills, communication, collaboration. It's kind of a place where students can take what they're learning in the classroom and what they've learned in life and apply it in kind of a professional setting.
No, that is so true. I think even the people who work at the Women's Center make it so supportive. I'm a freshman, but I know only 2 Women's Center interns, and they're one of the they're some of the most kind-hearted and the most respectful people I've met on campus, and they're wonderful people, and it's always fun to go talk to them. But when we talk about supportive spaces on campus, I think an important issue that comes up is obviously sexual assault survivors. And I understand how students working there can be a really important link between the faculty and the student community. So, how can students and faculty together make a safer space for sexual assault survivors on campus?
I love how you ask that question because it really does take all of us.
Yeah.
It is more than just one person saying that we shouldn't have sexual assault on campus. We all have a part to play, and there are, I think, a lot of things that we can do to promote a safer campus and to support survivors. I always like to remind people just to start by believing. So when someone tells you that they've been harmed by another person, believe them. Don't question them. You don't have to investigate. You don't need to know all of the details in order to hold space for someone to listen and to believe. I think knowing what the resources are, and this goes for students as well as faculty and staff, knowing what resources exist on campus so that you can make referrals if someone is looking for some information. Sometimes when a survivor discloses to a person, they have mustered up the courage to tell another person that someone has harmed them, and they want that to be the conversation, just a space to process that experience. Sometimes students who are survivors are looking for options and resources, so we can all do our part to know what those resources are and where to refer someone. Oftentimes, students will talk to each other first as they're trying to navigate what it means to be a survivor of sexual assault or dating violence or stalking. There are a lot of forms of power-based personal violence. So just being available and knowing what the resources are so that you can make a referral. We have a lot of information online. We have a lot of workshops like Green Dot Bystander Intervention Training, One Love Healthy Relationship workshops, where folks can kind of increase their knowledge base and practice the skills that are needed to help everyone actually feel safer and be safer on campus.
Yeah, I love your answer, and I love how you tell us about how we should actually believe the victims, because I think that's very important. There's a lot of victim blaming involved, especially when victims open up. But then also, just these on-campus resources are so important, but in a lot of cases, people don't talk about it. Although I do know a lot of organizations who work to sort of amplify those resources. But coming to that topic, what are some of the sexual assault support misconceptions that you've heard of, and how do we sort of go through them?
So I think that even though we're a small campus, we always have a challenge of getting information out to people. So, one challenge or misconception could be that people just don't know that there are resources. So elevating awareness is something that, we're always working on doing. I think another misconception can be that in order to get support or resources, someone has to hold accountable the person who harmed them. And that is a really clear issue that I want to make sure everybody knows, that everyone who has been harmed by another person has access to and deserves support, and they don't need to elect to go into an accountability process like a Title IX investigation or a hearing, or talk to DePauw Police in order to get those resources and support. You know, I think sometimes I hear from students that they're not sure, based on what someone did to them, if it warrants getting support. So, you know, sometimes students might, as they're trying to cope through and make sense of what someone's done to harm them, they might think, well, it wasn't this. It wasn't the most extreme, most violent form of sexual assault, but there is a continuum of misconduct and behaviors that are unwelcome and prohibited per our policies on campus or through federal legislation. So, you know, letting students know that no matter what someone did to them, they can come in and get resources and support, and that they don't need to know exactly what they want to do right away. They can come in and talk through things and get some time and some information to make the decision that's right for them.
I think it's interesting how you highlight the spectrum of experiences people face, because we hear that on and on in feminist dialogue that, oh, it doesn't matter if that wasn't the worst case scenario. I mean, it's sad that people often compare it to it and then sort of suppress their own experiences. But it's also interesting how it's like a first-hand question for a lot of survivors that, oh, whatever I went through isn't important enough.
I think sometimes sexual assault behaviors can be normalized in a community, and sometimes people are not necessarily wanting to identify what someone did to them as sexual assault, because that makes it real in a way. When you kind of, you know, acknowledge it and seek support for it, it kind of makes it real and maybe bigger in a certain way.
Thank you for that. But you did mention the Title IX office, and I think it is an important resource for also a lot of people. So I was wondering, how does the Women's Center connect the students to the Title IX department, and how does the procedure go?
Yeah, so the Women's Center works really closely with Title IX and makes a lot of referrals to the Title IX office. So when a student comes in to the Women's Center or talks to any advocate and discloses that someone has harmed them, oftentimes they won't share with me as an advocate all of the details of what happened, and they don't have to. They don't have to tell me the name of the person who harmed them or the details of what that conduct was in order for me to make a referral to Title IX. So, you know, I think a lot of students will associate Title IX with accountability for someone who has perpetrated violence against another person. Title IX also offers what we call supportive measures so that students can continue to have access to their education here at DePauw, and to try to take away some of the barriers that being a survivor presents. So sometimes a student might miss class or might fall behind on an assignment or miss a deadline. And the Title IX office can work with students and work with faculty to help navigate that and get some accommodations so that students can not have consequences for someone else choosing to harm them. Now, Title IX actually can also offer accountability for survivors if that's what they're seeking, that kind of justice, but they don't have to do that. Title IX offers a variety of options. Students can document what happened to them and not move forward with an accountability process. They can elect to go through a formal process, which is, I think, what a lot of people imagine, kind of an investigation and a hearing panel to determine responsibility and have sanctions if someone's found responsible. There's also an informal process that Title IX offers that is modeled more after a restorative justice process where a survivor gets to say, this is what I would like you to know, that you harmed me, and this is what would help me kind of restore my sense of justice and self on campus. And that's mediated by someone, so they don't have to say that to the person who harmed them, but a mediator kind of relays that information and, you know, brings that, you know, brings back the response to the survivor, and, you know, facilitates that whole process. Title IX is a huge partner, as well as counseling services for the Women's Center, including specifically not only counseling services and one-on-one therapy, but we also have a survivor support group that meets in the Women's Center every week for women who identify as survivors. Also, our university prevention and education for students comes out of counseling services, so working with that team is really important in terms of partners on campus in addition to Title IX.
I think it's empowering for survivors to put these policies out because they should know. But I was also wondering what other institutional policies, and not just for like just DePauw, but when it comes to sororities or fraternities or other sort of institutions on campus, what sort of policies would you think they instill in their institutions to sort of support and provide help for sexual assault survivors?
Yeah. You know, I think, well, I know at DePauw we have our Title IX policies, which are federally mandated. Because we're a private institution, we also have a sexual misconduct policy, which captures additional behavior that is prohibited. So, for example, unwanted kissing is not covered by Title IX. But we see that as an institution that is something that people should not be able to do without there being accountability or consequences or support, if that's what a survivor is looking for. So having those two policies helps, I think, cover and capture more behavior that is unwelcomed and unwanted on campus. In most colleges and universities, at least those who receive federal funding, which I think are most, have policies like that in place. I know a lot of student organizations, fraternities and sororities have their national organizations that also prohibit those kinds of behaviors, so dating, violence, stalking, sexual assault. I think beyond policy, though, I mean, if having a policy was, you know, the key, then we wouldn't have sexual assault happen on our campus. But we know it takes more than just policies. And, you know, getting to a place where we have a culture on campus among students and faculty and staff and alumni and families and prospective students and their families, where everyone knows that violence is not going to be tolerated on our campus and everyone has a part to play, that I think is the harder level to achieve.
I love how you say that policies are not the only thing which help, because the root of the problem is obviously the society and the community you live in and how they help you. And I think that makes me question, as students, I'm sure a lot of survivors do not want to reach out to college institutions because they do not feel so. And for them, their friend circles, their peer group is the first and primary and the only support probably. So how can students be better allies?
You know, that's such an important point, because survivors will often go to their friends first, or only their friends, or you know, something might happen in the middle of the night, and I'm not on campus in the middle of the night. Now, I can be reached in the middle of the night on our advocacy hotline, but if someone is there with, you know, a survivor, they're often going to be talking to their peers. I think, you know, that participating in the workshops and trainings or learning opportunities that we have is a really important way for people to support survivors. So we have, last year we did kind of a comprehensive campaign called PSA training, and that was prevention, support, and accountability, where we talked about kind of all three of those facets that we take in our multifaceted approach to prevention and education and support and accountability. This year, we have been leaning into our One Love Healthy Relationships workshop that helps students identify signs of healthy and unhealthy relationships and then what they can do. We've long been a Green Dot campus, so Green Dot is a national and now international program that is primary prevention. So not only teaching students to understand what power-based personal violence is, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, but to know what to do when they see it. So how to be an active bystander. So I think a way that we can all support survivors is to learn as much as we can, so that we know when someone discloses to us, if we are a trusted person that someone discloses to, we know what to say and to do. You mentioned before that there's a lot of victim blaming.
Yeah.
I think survivors sometimes can blame themselves
Yeah.
too, or feel shame for something that's not their fault. So normalizing those kinds of conversations just in our daily interactions is really important too.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for your answer. Um, I understand. While I understand that survivors have it like very difficult to um, share their experiences, what would you say to somebody who's hesitant about doing so?
I would say that whatever they choose for themselves is okay. And what is right for one survivor is not right for another survivor.
Yeah.
And when power and control and decision making have been taken away from someone, we want to restore that to them so that they're in control and they get to make the decisions that are right for them. Sometimes survivors will come to us right away when they've been harmed by another person. What's more often than not, people are coming to us after a delay of time, as maybe they've gotten support from friends and from peers, or they've had some time to sort through and try to navigate on their own what it means to be a survivor, and all of that is okay. I would want people to know, survivors to know, that they're not alone, and that if they want to get connected to resources on campus or off campus, we've got both resources on campus and in the local community, that talking to a SASA, a sexual assault survivor advocate, is one way to just know what your options are. An advocate is never going to say to someone, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
But they're going to share information so that someone can make an informed decision. They know what their resources are and can make the decision that's right for them. There are so many barriers as to why people don't come forward. We talked about blame and shame. Even just not understanding, like what happened to me feels like it was wrong or bad, but does it count as sexual assault? I think a lot of times survivors will see that other survivors have not gotten the support or the accountability that they're seeking, and that can be a deterrent too. On a small campus like ours, fear of people finding out that they've made a report, and while our processes are private and as confidential as possible, the fear of there being social consequences of a friend choosing to align themselves with the perpetrator of violence versus the survivor, or having a negative impact on their social environment, I think are a lot of barriers, and those are real. And that's again why I would never tell a survivor what they need to do, but would welcome the opportunity to let someone know what their options are so that they can make the decisions that feel right for them. I'd also want a survivor to know that it's okay to change their mind, to say, I don't want to do anything about this right now, and then to say, actually, I'm ready. Like, I feel like I do want to have a conversation for support, or I do now want to pursue an accountability process. So there's not a one path, and the path isn't always linear either.
Yeah. I think your answer is profound, because survivors feel this dual responsibility and this dual pressure of one standing up to their violator, but also just the social expectations and the reactions of everybody around them once they do it, and it's really difficult to do so. Thank you so much for that. I think my last question would be, what is your favorite part of working at the Women's Center?
I have so many favorite parts.
Mm.
You mentioned the bathroom and like the positive graffiti wall, or, just feeling, welcomed, or having some first year interns who who are just really great people. It is such a combination of all of those things. It's such a privilege for me to be able to work at the Women's Center, that DePauw has a Women's Center, and that's a priority for us. I think just the people that I get to interact with, a lot of times the first interaction that I have with a student might be because they've experienced trauma, someone has harmed them. So I'm not seeing, the whole of who they are. I'm seeing them in the aftermath of someone who, after someone has harmed them, but the relationships that we develop, and the just being able to walk alongside someone in that process as they navigate survivorship, in addition to like the students who I get to work with who are incredible interns and activists and advocates themselves. It's just a place that is unapologetic about centering women in everything that we do, welcoming everyone of any gender identity, but just keeping women at the center of what we do is what I love.
Thank you so much for your time at the Women's Center, and thank you so much for giving your time here too. This was a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much.
Thank you. The
Bye.
pleasure's all mine.
Thank you.